Good evening. Welcome to the April 15th Abington Finance Committee Meeting, April 15th, 2020. Tonight we'll be meeting to go over the fiscal year 21 budget, primarily just reviewing that, talking about town manager transition and the financial impact of that, probably very briefly, probably not in great detail there. So there's not a lot of There's some, but not a lot of new information, unless the current town manager or town accountant have anything new there, but not a lot from the Board of Selectmen that has come my way. We'll go over liaison reports, correspondence, of which there is none, and reviewing minutes, of which there are none. So, looks like Chris Murphy is joining. Hold on for a second to get him fully into the meeting. We also have, for those watching the recording of this, we have Katie Comas, who had to step away briefly and will be back. We do have a couple of members who are not able to make it tonight, unfortunately. And Rick looks very confused.
Rick, you all set up there?
Me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, I'm all set.
Okay, you look very
Yes.
confused.
He's checking
Probably looking at something else.
something else.
Well, I'm looking at other things while we wait. My day is never done that.
I've been there, done that. Chris, welcome. All right, we'll get going. We will, as you can see, we're sharing the agenda. We will switch over to the budget, and I will call up the latest budget document as we discuss with the town manager and the town accountant where we are at with developing a balanced budget.
Yes, Matt and company, and please chime in. So what you have in front of you, I know it's explained in the email from Sue. The budget that you see in front of you is a balanced budget based upon the assumptions that we've been working with for the last 60 days or so in terms of revenue.
Yeah.
It is not the Armageddon budget if the state decides it's going to be cutting local aid in any portion this year, which would be obviously very unlikely because we've already received it, so they really couldn't technically do that. At this time, we really don't know what the end of year deficiency may be in terms of loss of revenue, keeping in mind that the taxation at this point is the number one revenue to come in, and no nice way to say this, but one way or the other, the town gets its tax revenue. That's the reality of it. So in terms of end of year cash flow, we don't think that's going to be an issue. Now, going into next year, obviously, what we have is a balanced budget. Some of the things that it does include, it includes the Chapter 70 aid, that the new Chapter 70 aid in the school budget in its entirety with a couple of caveats. It also does include the incorporating a new planner position into the planning board budget. It includes the additional civilian dispatch positions in the police department. And that's basically the only increases. Sue, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the key points that are still in the budget. Now, this is, in our conversations with Peter and Felicia this week, over the last actually 2 weeks, and they make it clear the school committee has not received the recommendation or an explanation from Peter yet, but we've backed off the school budget in two ways. We removed a total of $200,000 from the previous, from where we were previously in terms of a budget package. 100 of that would be a pure cut from the existing request. The other $100,000, what we're doing is we're recommending you'll see on your sheet that be put in an article for special education. The rationale for this is because one of the concerns the school has every year, and I don't want to use the word pad, but they've got to be very conscientious of the fact that at any day, at any time, they could get a special education placement that can blow their budget. So what we decided upon together is that we'll, again, it's hard to just pick a number, but we're using $100,000. We'll put it in a separate article for town meeting. So if during the fiscal year, they have some special education placements that they were not including in the budget, that money could be used for that purpose rather than build something into the budget they may not need. And going into FY 2022, they would build into the budget what they know to be the special education requirements going into that fiscal year. So the intent of this would really to be something that would be ongoing, so that it gives the school department some comfort in case they get hit with mid-year placements, but it also something they would have to build into their budget in subsequent years. So the reduction of $200,000 from the school budget, in addition to reductions town budget, fairly minimal, gets us to a balanced budget. Keeping in mind that the funding sources, not for the operating budget, but for a lot of the rest of the spending plan, a lot of that, some of those are free cash, including the special education set aside. There's no one-time revenues in the budget. There is, if you look through the summary, which I know you're not there yet, it does propose essentially a funding plan for the special and annual town meeting that includes a capital budget as well as putting $1.1 million into stabilization.
Yep. I have that up on the screen now.
Okay.
Summary.
Thank you. I mean, part of the rationale for such a large amount in stabilization is to balance
Yes.
right now the fact that we
Current
really,
economic times.
I'm sorry, can I be heard
is-
okay, Matt?
Yep, you can. I was just saying it's the current economic times.
Yes. So, looking at perhaps how to deal with state aid, possible state aid reductions from what's currently proposed. It's very difficult right now to knowing what direction to head in, but at least to the extent that we can put as much money aside into savings right now, that's what, until we have further information, that's what I would recommend we do. The capital that we have in front of you is fairly minimal. The non-budget spending articles, and we can go through that at the time. But going back to the original point with regard to the operating budget, Sue, did I miss any key points in that budget between the school budget explanation, the planning, the additional police position, dispatch position rather? Anything else come to mind, Sue?
Actually, the police position isn't dispatch, it's for the school resource, the court resource officer.
I'm sorry, yes.
That's right.
That's right. That's the position
That's
that is currently being performed by a police officer. Right? That gets a police officer,
On the right.
basically civilianizes a job so a uniformed officer can be doing uniformed officer work. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
So that's your budget right now.
Why, this is Chris. Why did when we first looked at the total revenues, it was 55,895. Now it's 56,2. Is that the $1 million from the special new school?
Chapter 78.
Yeah.
Let me look at my form here.
Chris, are you referring to when we first got our budget packet?
Right.
Then yes. We got extra chapter 78 due to the new formula.
Student Opportunity Act, correct.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And
So I
Did
think
anything else change?
So I think it was a combination. I think the Student Opportunity Act added to it, but I think also the student enrollment numbers helped to bump up the overall Chapter 7.
That's correct, Matt. Yes. Yes.
And when, just so you know, Chris, when Rick and Sue have done the initial budget, they're always very conservative with that number.
Okay.
Trying to go below what it'll actually come in at for budgeting purposes to prepare us in case it comes in at the lowest possible.
Right. When we go through the process, we like to start at a point that it can only get better, both on the revenue and the expenditure side, so that, you know, the gap we're closing sometimes is a little artificial to begin with, but the last thing we want as we go through the process is to have any surprises go the other way. We like to be closing a gap, even if some of it is paper. So that's why we tend to, even some may call it underestimate our revenues initially, and then close the revenues, increase them to a reasonable extent as we go forward. But
Okay.
as you
All
all
right.
know, we've done pretty well end of year closing our revenue to expenditures. So we remain reasonably conservative. That's not an issue. But is that the significant piece you're looking at, Chris? Was there anything else?
Yes. Yeah. No. It just
Okay.
it had gone up a few $100,000. And
Yeah. Mhm.
That's I wondered why.
Okay.
Considering I would have expected it to go down, but
Hmm.
I guess you're doing it as if not. This budget is if nothing's happened.
Pretty
as
much.
far as the economy.
Right.
That is correct. Right. This is based upon this is the process we've been working with from the beginning.
Okay.
So obviously our major concern is if the additional funding, primarily the additional funding from the Student Opportunity Act, again, nearly $1 million in new Chapter 78, if that is eliminated, reduced, that's a major problem for Abington and any other town. We're certainly not alone.
So
Right.
do we expect that do we think that there is the possibility that that would be eliminated for fiscal year 21?
That we don't know. Our legislators, we have not gotten any really good information either from our legislators or from the Department of Education. And we keep our eye on it, as do Peter and Felicia, very closely. So I wish I had more to report
Okay.
as of this moment, but I don't.
So then the next question to that end is, I know you said you had talked to Peter. Have you talked about the 8 additional positions?
Yes.
And right now they're still in the budget. Is there any discussion about if worse comes to worse, what happens with those?
I'm sorry, which positions, Matt? I'm having trouble finding.
Sorry, the
I'm trying to
8
turn
new,
the volume up here, so
Yeah.
it's not you.
So let me speak to that because Rick's having
Thanks, Sue.
trouble with the volume, but basically we're going on what we know right now.
right?
And yeah, there may be some changes coming soon, but we can't expect for those changes until we know what those changes are. So we're doing best budget practices based on what we know at this time.
But when will we decide whether or not to hire people? I mean, will
sorry,
we have a chance to, before we hire people, to sort of say, maybe in the budget, but we can't do it because we know the budget.
Yeah, Chris, that's an excellent point. And I can't speak for the school department, but I can't speak for anybody at the moment. But realistically, I would agree that, the positions that are right now proposed in the non-school budget, the planner and the court and evidence
civilian
officer,
court
those,
representative.
those should, I would suggest those should not be filled until such time as we have some reasonable comfort with the state of the state going into next fiscal year. I know the schools have a little different challenge because they have to, they've got a hiring process they have to go through to be ready for the beginning of a school year. that's a little bit different. The dynamics that they are dealing with right now with this particular pandemic, I think that's another conversation, a separate conversation with Peter, perhaps in the next meeting or two of the Finance Committee.
I've sort of had that conversation with Felicia today. It's like their intention is to fill those positions, but not if we're in a state that we can't fill those positions. So
how would we know that though? Like, so I'm assuming, like, it's just if you were gonna buy, like, so if you just take this example, if you were in January saying, all right, next year I'm gonna buy a car, would you at this particular point go, all right, I'm not gonna do that right now. I'm definitely not gonna think as if I am still buying that car.
I think that's how
Well,
people are thinking, that, we want those positions, but we are not going to fill those positions until we know that we have the money from the state.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, wouldn't we know in April? Like, when do we find out about that money that we're talking about there?
Well, I think the problem, Greg, is that we legitimately don't know. This is unprecedented. So,
yes.
So nobody can tell us right now, whether it's, again, as I mentioned, whether it's legislators or the Department of Education. Nobody can give us an answer to that question. We haven't been here in a long time in this type of situation, and obviously never one quite like this, where we don't know how and when this is going to be, resolved.
No, 100%. I'm just saying, like, there's, if you talk to any of like, I've talked to a couple people that do budgetary planning, stuff like that, because there's such a lack of tax that is coming in on goods and services, on just average stuff. It is going to impact things this year, but I mean, we can't really change this year that much. So next year, they're going to have to adjust stuff. So my only question would be, why aren't we planning for, instead of let's just say 20% positive, why aren't we planning for a 20% negative? And if the numbers don't look like that's happening in February or something like that, then we could adjust. I think it's a lot easier to adjust from the positive than it is to adjust in the negative.
Yes, I guess the problem, I'm not sure I fully understand how to apply your thoughts, very appropriate thoughts to the municipal finance sector.
So maybe say, instead of saying we're going to have 100 teachers and we wanted to put 120, that we plan for 80.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is, well, the challenge here is that we don't know if we're going to get the additional funding through the Student Opportunity Act.
Yep.
If we don't, those positions aren't being filled.
Yes.
The challenge is we don't know when we're going to know the answer to that question.
Got it.
And the hardship on the school department 100%. Is trying to deal with staffing and work plans and student curriculum for next year. So it's a real operational problem for them. But there's no way the positions are being filled unless we have a commitment of local aid from the state.
100%. And I completely get that. My point more, Rick, is, again, I don't really talk that succinctly. My bigger point is, what if we don't have enough to fill what we had this year? That's all I'm saying. So that's where I'm saying we're planning on growth, and I get it that we can say, hey, let's not do that. Should we be planning for a subtraction? Because, again, you're right. Nobody knows. But again, all you have to do is just look at yourself on a micro scale. And if you knew that there was probably going to be a kick in the gut, would you go out and get the new car or whatever? Would you go for something different? My only point is to plan for maybe the worst case scenario and be happy if that doesn't happen, instead of planning for even what we did last year.
No, it's a valid point, Greg, and I know we spoke about that last week a little bit.
Yep.
it's a very valid point, but the reality is in 1 week, haven't really had any time to do any significant work on that particular concept.
No, I don't expect you to, Rick, by the way, for the record.
The problem does become ultimately, what is it that is the potential worst case scenario? To me, I would say the absolute worst case scenario is we don't get the additional state aid, and based upon a level state aid, a reduction that is proportionate to the estimated reduction in state state revenue. A proportionate amount of local aid as a portion of the state budget. If I'm not saying that well, I don't think.
Yeah, but
that would be fiscal, that would be beyond chaos to have that level of reduction in revenue.
Sue, what were you going
Once
to say?
again, what's
So
worst case? What's
basically,
worst case? How does one define worst
we're
case?
going on what we have, and Rick has managed, if you look at the special town meeting warrant, tried to put as much into stabilization to prepare for what we might need to adjust for in the future. So,
And what that does is it buys time.
Yeah.
Because obviously, that's the rainy day fund, and if it's about as hot as it's going to rain, but it just buys you time, because obviously you don't want to be using one-time revenues, in on a recurring basis. You can't do that.
Right.
You see, you can only use one-time funds, twice. Not really. That's free cash. So the problem becomes, how do we deal with it right now? Beyond, more of an exercise that you're talking about, Greg. You put as much money aside as you possibly can, and keep the budget as reasonably modest based upon what you know at the time.
Yeah.
This is fluid. We're not used to this. There are a lot of towns, fortunately for them, who rely very little on state aid. So there aren't that many though. You want to go up there, the 495, 128 belt, and some of those very, wealthy communities, they don't get a lot of state aid. And they're not in the same situation as the majority of cities and towns who are in the same situation we're in, not knowing how they're going to put their budgets together, other than where they are right now in the process. So I know that's not very helpful, but that's basically the reality of the moment.
What other revenues that are in here are likely to decrease? For instance, the meals tax, or licenses and permits. If the economy shut down, less building and all that. I know you can't. Again, it's unknown, but to the point that Greg is making, are we fooling ourselves by just going with what we had before?
Again,
Even just house prices, right? So house prices, isn't there a tax that's put on house prices, or at least the?
So it's the assessment of the house,
Right.
and the house would have to be reassessed for the tax rate, for the tax payment for that house, for that property to decrease.
Yeah.
Doesn't
I think that lag, both going up and down, that lags behind
Yes.
the actual economy.
right. So the new growth piece of the tax levy, that's a valid number. That's not something that's going to decrease based upon the economy. That's for building that has already occurred, and the value is now being captured. What Chris is referring to, obviously, is, again, that's it's type of conversations we've also had internally. How much of our estimated receipts are, driven by the economy? And I guess, once again, we don't know what the answer is going to be. You can certainly, one of our concerns is that too. I mean, the meals tax being a primary, again, if you want to talk about economically driven revenue sources, that's, probably at the top of the list. Not
It's
knowing how
only
long
300,000,
this,
so.
I'm sorry, Chris,
Yeah, but even in the budget you sent us originally, it was only 300,000. So it's
Right.
not a huge number compared to some of the others.
Right. The largest one obviously is motor vehicle excise.
Okay.
And we've heard had a lot of input from a lot of people. Who's credible? Who the heck knows? I think we're all looking at a crystal ball. And that's based upon current estimates as historical estimates. The problem becomes, again, are people going to be buying new cars? There's a school of thought that says, well, interest rates are dirt cheap, and could be a lot of people buying new cars. I don't know. If I was a betting man, I'm not sure I'd quite go that far. Once again, you get to a point where how far can you predict these things in such a time that we've never been before, and which comes back to the thought process of getting as much in stabilization as we possibly can.
Do we have any statistics on Abington unemployment in the last? I mean, I don't know if you ever get this, Rick. Might be a far out question, but
Yeah.
Are there statistics on Abington unemployment as of January, February, March, April?
You mean from the Department of Employment Training? I have not seen those, Greg.
Have we ever even looked at them? This is what I don't know. Even if anybody ever looks at that,
I have not personally.
Yeah.
I have not. No.
That might be a good thing to look at. Just when you're asking your question of exactly what you just asked, are people going to be buying cars? Are people going to be buying houses? Or it might be a decent number if it looks like 1%. The number's gone up 1%, and the rest of the country's gone up by 10% or something. You know what I'm saying?
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to find some methodology
And one of the very difficult things of the situation that we're in right now is that no one knows what the economy is going to do when the situation clears up and people start leaving their houses again.
Yeah, right. It could.
We don't know if
No, I mean, was it going to be?
the economy is going to shoot back up, if it's going to stay low. No one really knows how that's going to.
Mm-hmm. I know this theory of pent up demand. Is that going to? I don't know.
We're in a difficult spot trying to plan out the next year at this exact moment.
Sure. Now, one of the options too is ultimately, and it may have to happen anyway, is a possibly having to start the year, approve a budget to start the year, and then make adjustments in a special town meeting prior to having to set the tax rate. That's something that a lot of towns have been doing every year. It's part of what they do because they're either unable or unwilling to set a final budget prior to the beginning of a fiscal year. We've never done that, at least in my memory. I don't think in my mind, it's a bad practice, but again, there have been some communities for a long, long time, but that's the way they do business. This may be one of those years where we do have to start the budget, start a fiscal year with the understanding that there are new hires. It may very well be that, it's one of those things you hate to say publicly, and we've talked about it internally. It may be a situation where we're talking to all of our collective bargaining units about pay freezes, furloughs. These are things that, again, we're talking about internally, but
Yeah.
Of course, now that I've said it publicly, it might create a little bit of a different.
No, there are things that I think all companies are going through right now, or at least most companies are going through, and it's a similar effect in the public sector where you have to start looking at what the possibilities are and what the options are to make ends meet for the town.
And
question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, go ahead. I was shifting.
No, I think, in an environment that's it's almost the overwhelming majority of the employees are in labor unions. So, so any reductions in benefits have to be negotiated.
Yep.
Ultimately agreed to by a collective bargaining unit. If not, it really leaves you with the potential of additional cuts than you ordinarily would have. And as we all know, that it takes 3 cuts to get the benefit of 2 because of the way unemployment works. So, those are the things that we're talking about internally, as well as I know other communities are doing the same thing, but you also have the same labor issues because of the labor laws in Massachusetts. We don't create these problems; we have to live with them.
Is the problem with the town as opposed to a company, or I've been doing
question
for a nonprofit?
Go ahead, Chris.
We can, in the nonprofit or company, you can plan for the worst and make your budget for the worst, and then if things turn out better, you just spend more. But with the town, once you set the budget, you can't spend more. That's correct?
Correct.
Even if you have the money.
That's correct. Well, you have to go back to a town meeting to be authorized to spend the money. And on the other side, conversely, to take a very conservative, I'm not sure, hyper-conservative approach, you have to lay people off, particularly schools. You've got to give people notice of layoff well in advance of when we would know what our local aid is. So it's a difficult dynamic because once you lay people off, they're collecting unemployment and the town's paying unemployment, and ultimately it's possible you didn't have to do that. So it's also hard. How do you plan a school year? And again, I'm not the school superintendent, and people are probably saying the town manager shouldn't be advocating for the schools, but it's a legitimate problem is how they plan a school year, how they plan class sizes, curriculum. When you're presuming or you're laying people off that you may not have to lay off. And so it's really not a good. It's not a great system we live in. That's really that's the problem. We have laws that do not work well together in terms of labor and finance, and we can't do anything about that.
So I think for our purposes, at least right now, in the current place where we stand, the things that we have to be concerned with are the fiscal year 21 income for the town, the revenues for the town. So we talked about the meals tax and how that's overall 300,000. We would expect there to be some level of drop in that, but we don't know to what extent. The property tax, both residential, corporate, industrial, should be fairly static. We don't know who would not be able to pay in a given in the environment, but I wouldn't imagine there would be a huge amount of fluctuation there. Rick or Sue, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I would agree.
Those are and excise tax we would expect kind of similar to property tax. It's not going to change significantly. It probably won't change significantly up because of people not buying new cars. It probably also won't change significantly down because of people's inability to pay. But the downward side of those three are what we are looking to be able to account for with putting money into stabilization. Would that be accurate?
That's what my thought process is, and I think Sue and our other financial officers agree.
So then,
Yeah.
nope, go ahead, Rick.
No, I mean, the alternative to making substantial cuts that you didn't have to make, that have labor and other financial impact, is that in its own right, that's irresponsible. I know common sense, I know Greg brings up the exact point. From a common sense standpoint, well, why don't you plan for the worst? And if things get better, well, timing is, we don't have the advantage of timing. The timetable, the budgetary timetable, the timetable for the state budget process, it's out of our hands. We have to comply with the requirements of Mass General Law with when we fund a budget, when we make certain personnel decisions, when those can be implemented to the beginning of a fiscal year. As I mentioned with the schools, what they have to do to prepare for a school year, what scheduling, what potential layoffs will do, and classroom sizes. These requirements do not converge well for us to have a budget process that's I want to say that's smooth.
Yeah.
That's a bad word, but that's the best I could come up with, Mr. Chairman.
So then the next question I would have would be the other side of our revenue is the state aid, Chapter 70, the Student Opportunity Act, et cetera. When will we know final numbers there?
I don't know. I don't think anybody in the state can tell you that right now, but that is the biggest question we face.
Do we have any idea? Like, do they have a date that they have to have a state budget passed by or in place by, and
Well,
that they can't change the numbers after the fact?
Well, they have done that regardless of any schedule. They have changed the numbers in the past. There have been, it's been a while, but there have been mid-year cuts in state aid. That has happened. So in terms of when we will get a final number from the state, a state aid number, I don't know. It may not even be before the end of this fiscal year. And there's nobody who can tell us that yet.
Is there anybody at the state level that we could talk to say, I mean, there must be planning people, there must be even just like state reps that, I mean, is there any guidance we can get? Because the reason that I'm saying 20% is 20% isn't excruciating. It's not extreme. And it's a good number to look at and say, okay, if things don't work out, 20% should, I mean, I'm looking at a lot of these numbers, especially on certain ones, 20% can make somewhat of a difference. If everything ends up working out and we get I'm just saying for planning purposes, if we get the budget that we're looking for because we received the state aid, then we could change things.
But you would have to re-vote everything. It's easier to vote what you know, and then when it comes back that the information is less than what you thought, then you tell you cut your departments and everybody's required to do that 20% cut. But if you don't vote that now, then you can't re-vote what you need until you have another special town meeting. Am I right, Rick?
Right, and you also have to do it in a timely manner so that you can actually set a tax rate and get tax bills out.
Yeah. So I think processes like saying we have the town planner position and the civilian court resource position in the budget, but we are not going to fill those positions until we know for certain that we will have the income to pay them is proper practice for this time. I would suggest that for this, it's difficult with the hiring cycle for the school department to try to do the same thing with the positions they have, depending on how long this goes and how long we don't know about the state money. But I would suggest that we try to do the same thing and say, plan for plan for them being in the budget but not being filled. And if we're able to get that information soon enough to fill them for the school year, then we fill them. If not, then they get filled for the next fiscal year, if the finances are
Right.
there.
I think that makes sense.
Right.
I mean, the other option, and this would really be difficult at this point in the budget process, would be to effectively reduce those, additional positions, any proposed positions in the school department. And again, take those funds that would otherwise be going to that and put those, actually, no, you say you could put those funds that that are recurring funds into stabilization also, but that's actually, the more I think about it, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think
your point, Matt, is well taken.
I think it makes more sense to plan for the funds but not use them until we have certainty on the income coming in.
And who controls that, Matt? Like, Rick's not going to be here.
The state controls that.
No. I mean,
Greg's thirsty.
Yeah, who's going to control that it's not done? You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, Greg, I didn't understand the
So
question.
that would be discussions. So Rick, that's discussions between the town manager's office and the school department.
I mean, or any department, right? Just not even school department, any department. So it would be
any department. So that's essentially town manager, town office control.
So the new town manager is going to need to know that in whatever month he's going to have to look at this and say whether or not we can do these things, whatever it is.
Right. It's going to be pretty apparent. Either we get the state aid or we don't.
Right.
But
Sue, what were you going to say?
I don't mean to toot my own horn, but if the money's not there, it's not getting paid. So,
Yes.
Right, well,
It's a very good point.
know.
Sue's in a very good position for that.
Yeah, I'm going to know whether that money's coming in and whether or not we can fund these positions well before we need to fund these positions.
Yep. And I just want to put out there, and we all met with the school department a little over a month ago. We very much were excited for the ability to add these positions for the school department. I think we all want these positions for the school department, but we also want to be able to pay these people. And we also want to not lay these people off a few months after we hire them. So.
Exactly.
That's one of the bigger things that I'm thinking about, is that if this isn't a great situation, you now are just, you're just ruining people's lives at that point.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. The other thing I'll point out, and I don't know who's been through this before. I know Matt's been around a little bit. And I think Barbara.
Not long enough. Barbara and Sean.
Right.
Who are not
once you start proposing, huge cuts, then it's very difficult when you have departments now that are now in competition. You have elected boards, you have appointed boards and committees advocating for different things, and it's very difficult at that point when you start proposing huge cuts to keep the organization from fracturing.
Yep.
You see it other places. It's very difficult, and so that adds to the financial problem. Now you have competing interests. You have relationship problems between that can take years to heal. You have labor unions now that have their parent organizations involved. You really have to be careful about what you do, when you do it, and how you do it, because there's so many of these factors that a lot of people they're not aware of, and they shouldn't be if they're not in this environment, and the implications can last for years. So it's something you have to be very careful about when you're talking about making huge cuts in the public sector.
It would help me if we can just sort of label it. There are three pieces to revenue from what I can see. It's the what comes through the town, the taxes, and which looks like it's about 39 million. The state revenue looks like it's about 12, and then other stuff, which is the motor vehicle and the licensing, is about 5. Is that a good way to look at it? And the 39 is, at least for next year, is pretty solid because we know what the tax rate is. The
That's
5
correct.
million, maybe it goes down a few $100,000, but that's only a few $100,000. And then the state is the one that we're not sure about, whether it goes from 12 million to 10 million. Is that make sense?
That's exactly right, Chris. Yes.
Yep.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So it's that state aid number, particularly as you can see, the big one, Chapter 70. That's what we're most fearful of. There are times, over the years, unrestricted general government aid. That's, as you can see, a little over $2 million. That at times, may have been reduced, but that in itself isn't a huge piece of our overall state aid, because there's been times when Chapter 70 is held harmless, both financial and, let's face it, political reasons by the state.
Yep.
So if that's basically held harmless, any other percentage reductions in our state aid, those are manageable. But it's all Chapter 70 all the time. That's what we really have to focus on.
So if that went down 20%, that means our revenue goes down 1.6, but 1.6 of 56 isn't 20%. It's only 3%.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that makes me feel a little better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
At least for next year. The year after, 2022.
the year after is an entirely different story that we have.
Right.
To use Rick's comment, we have no crystal ball for that right now.
No.
So,
Well,
but for where we're at, sorry, Rick, for where we're at right now, I think the overall plan, until we hear otherwise, is that we continue working off of the state numbers that we have until we hear a change there, but we put contingencies into place, especially with new positions and new spending, to make sure that our belts are tight until we have a final number there and a firm commitment.
and I would agree, and I do think that it warrants a further conversation with the school committee administration and the finance committee, because they're, as we mentioned, the implications for them are much greater than the implications for non-school part of the government.
Agreed.
But Chris, you pretty much crystallized the concern here.
Yep.
So is it possible to find a contingency of, just based on your sort of experience, how much could the state, nobody's going to hold you to it, well, certainly because you'll be in Carver, but how much could the state funding drop, and then see if we could identify things that we're increasing that will stay in the budget, but we won't do until we find out if the state money is coming or not. 10% or something like that, based on 2008, for instance.
Could you, if you don't mind, if you could just repeat that? I mean, I know it's commonsensical, but it's to wrap my head around a little bit.
All right, so let me do a hypothetical. The state funding is about 12 million right now.
Right.
If in 2008 the state funding dropped by 10%, we could say, let's look at this. The budget stays the way it is, but we're going to look at a 10% reduction in the state funding, which would be about 1.2 million. Now we're going to look at the expenses we have, the increase in expenses, and hold off on doing try and find things in the increases that we can hold off on doing, like the open positions, but, are people buying, systems or whatever, hold off on those and see if we can come up with 1.2 million worth to match that contingency state thing that we think might happen based on the last time we had a big cut.
Mhm. I think that's a good point. And to go back a little bit, when I mentioned that the plan that we have out there at the moment has not been endorsed yet by the school committee, but realistically, to the extent that the entire municipal operation department, if it was simply a matter of, okay, a pure level service budget, and which would again include a school budget that's level service, doesn't add additional positions that are funded by additional state aid, that, would the school budget be, an additional 4%? And this is purely hypothetical. And if you're in the school committee watching this, it's purely hypothetical. And I don't mean to suggest that we do this. But purely from a pure level services across the board, what does that look like without the student opportunity money and the requirements that come with that? Because these positions aren't going to be filled. These opportunities aren't going to be filled without those funds. But with those funds come requirements. Without the funds, their requirements aren't there. That's not good for the town because getting the programs and the staff in place, that's good for the town. That's good for the students. It's good for ultimately for, I'm one of those people that thinks a good school system's good for your property values. But I think that's something that would have to be looked at, across the board, and that's before, there's conversation about, as I mentioned earlier, spending freezes or furloughs. Furloughs don't really save that much money. We've looked at them in-house a little bit. Not the kind of money that's going to make a significant dent in a budget process. Those are helpful when you get into a fiscal year and realize that the dynamics have changed significantly. And that's one of the options that you go to. I don't think you start a fiscal year planning on furloughs. I'd say that is somewhat, it's inconsistent, it's those two words together, furloughs and planning. So I think that's a good conversation to have with the school committee and the finance committee, and certainly something that Sue and I can speak to our school administration about this week. But again, I'm not proposing that. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
Not just the school, it's all the departments.
Yes.
No, I would agree. I would agree, Chris. Yes. It's just more of it's a larger exercise that for them.
Yes.
And I think unlike a lot of towns, Matt, we're sensitive to that, aren't we?
Yep. So you mentioned you and Sue can start that discussion with the school department during the week. I think it would probably be wise for us to invite members of the school department, school committee to join us for our discussion next Wednesday.
Yeah, I would agree. That's and don't worry, I will be here for that, for what it's worth.
So
the budget document is what we have essentially represented for quite some time now.
Yep.
As is the revenue structure. I don't want to get ahead of you, but when you want to look at the warrant and the proposed spending plan, which is summarized here, I think that helps the overall context a little bit.
Yep. But
it's pretty darn modest on the operating budget.
So I think sort of to sum up this part of the discussion, we are at the point with everything that we started essentially in December, or so working towards this point. We are at the point of a balanced budget. In normal years, when we reach this point, we're a lot happier than we are right now because of the circumstances of right now. But we need to continue to put contingencies in place for what to do if this budget becomes out of balance because of the overall economy. So that's our continued work between now and town meeting. And it will start with the discussions during the week and next week with the school department.
Rick, do you know if the selectmen voted yesterday to postpone town meeting?
No, they have not specifically voted that yet.
Okay.
I know there
They're
have been
meeting next Monday.
discussions.
Yes, well, it has been raised. Chairman, Mr. Conley and I discussed this before their last meeting, and we thought, I mean, as you know, looking around South Shore, well, actually around the entire state, towns are doing that. Some have actually postponed them indefinitely. Some have postponed them until, X amount of weeks after the state of emergency has lifted. Many have postponed them till late May and early June because they have April town meetings.
Yep.
So our later town meeting, realistically, some towns are delaying to that point.
That's funny because just a few years ago when the old high school was being demolished was when we moved up to when we are now. So we were actually significantly later before.
Right, right.
Up until about 3 years ago.
And the value of that has been that we don't need to go back and balance our budget in the fall like a lot of other communities have to. So however, that doesn't, the key question again is, will town meeting actually be delayed? I think to some extent, I guess if I had to take a vote right now, if I was on the Board of Selectmen, I would vote to do so with a date to be determined upon recommendation of all the parties that be, including the Finance Committee. But I just, for planning purposes, to not be held to that date without knowing the state of the state.
Right.
Do you agree, Matt, or other members?
I do. I think that we as the Finance Committee have to, until it is delayed, we have to prepare as if it is happening on that date. But I expect that it will not happen on that date.
Yeah, it's difficult to prepare when there's such uncertainty. On the other hand, I think it's a responsibility, me, Sue, and the financial team, to give you a plausible spending plan, budget and otherwise, that if town meeting were today, we could go to town meeting and be in pretty good shape.
Correct.
So
and
the irony is how happy we were not that long ago with additional state aid and what we knew and have received in terms of free cash certification.
Yep.
Times were looking pretty good not that long ago, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Just over a month ago.
Yeah.
So with that said, do we want to roll down the special and the annual town meeting proposed warrant articles? I have up on the screen the summary of them. We have both of them, and I will just super quickly cycle through them so people can see. We have the special town meeting with 4 warrant articles on there: budget transfers, transfer for sick leave buyback, free cash for the snow and ice, and then moving money into stabilization. We talked about the moving money into stabilization. We were trying to put as much as we possibly can into stabilization. I think we've covered that pretty well. Does anyone have any questions on that particular one? So I can know. Sick leave buyback is
the sick leave buyback. Sorry. So
sick leave buyback, I would assume, as is almost always the case with this, that's a contractual.
Correct. We have a person in the library union who is retiring, and she pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement, is to receive a percentage of her accrued sick time up to a cap.
The library has a union too?
Yep.
Yes, the library staff is within
All
the
those
union.
sweatshops in the library.
Greg,
Goodness gracious.
The free cash, that's as of the beginning of the year, or
I'm sorry, what's that, Chris? I missed the beginning of that.
the free
Free
cash,
cash.
that 918,000, that's as of a particular date?
that's as of June. That's as of June 30th, but that's not the total free cash. The total free cash number was
Oh, okay.
sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was like 1.6 and change. And so that would be what was left after we spent on capital items and other things.
So Chris, for example, if you look at Article 2 on the screen there, it takes 162,460 from free cash. The capital plan on the annual, which I'll bring up really quickly. We go down to Article 3 on the annual. You'll see there are several items that are coming from free cash on there.
Yeah. My concern is that there are things we know, revenues that we know haven't happened in April and May. They may not be significant, but are there sales taxes and things that we put 340,000 in the budget last year and they're only going to be 260 this year? How does that flow into what we plan to start next year with? You know what I mean?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure I understood the question, Chris.
So the revenue in the 2020 budget assumed a certain amount of meals taxes. I'm back on my meals tax, but it's the one thing that I know.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know there's the meals tax in April, March, April, and May are going to be severely reduced from what we planned. So that may only add up to 30 or 40,000, but does this recognize that revenue's got to come from somewhere else?
To quickly
enough that we don't worry about it?
To quickly kind of separate. So what we're looking at, the free cash, the certified free cash that's mentioned here in the special town meeting warrant and here in the annual, my cursor will move, in the annual town meeting warrant is the free cash that was certified as essentially the money remaining from fiscal year 20. No, fiscal year 19.
2019, yes.
Yep. So this is money that when fiscal year 19 ended last June, on June 30th, what was left with that the town had gets certified, like the state has a formula and determines what is certified as money that will go back to the town to be allowed to be spent.
Yeah.
So where you see free cash on both the special and annual warrants that we're looking at right now is essentially money from not the current fiscal year, but last fiscal year, and not next fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
So the meals tax that's going down right now in fiscal year 20 doesn't impact that particular money.
Mm-hmm.
However, that's where, if you look at the highlighted, what you're talking about, the March, April, May reduction in the meals tax based on the budget that we passed last year, we're looking to put money into stabilization in case that is a drastic enough impact that there's anything that we need to do.
Okay.
To adjust there and to adjust
I'm sorry.
in fiscal year 21 as well.
The other factor I'll point out is that, yes, we have every reason to believe there will be some drop off in the overall revenue that we anticipated for the current fiscal year. But as you can see by how healthy our free cash number is this past year, we've been estimating our receipts extremely conservatively.
Okay.
So we're not fearful that we're not going to collect as much in estimated receipts. It may impact our free cash next year, after next year's certification. It may impact that, but we're not going to be in a position where we've taken in less revenue than we anticipated for the current.
Okay. All right.
Right. Or at least enough less that we would be in the red.
Yeah. My fear was we were using the free cash from 2019 for 2021, and then we're going to use it for 2022. But you're saying that that won't happen because the revenue was conservative in the 2020 budget.
Yep. And for example, Article 2 there, that you see here highlighted on the screen now, snow and ice removal, that's something that we put free cash towards each year.
Yeah.
And we talked about that when we were going through the budget process and why the snow and ice line is so low and what all of the restrictions are, and essentially financial gamesmanship with snow and ice removal that goes on. But that's something that is a year after year we use free cash to pay off the snow and ice removal. The number that I see for snow and ice removal there, I think might be the lowest I've ever seen while I'm on the committee, which I am very pleased by.
Right. Now, as long as it doesn't snow before now in special town meeting, that number should be pretty good.
Correct. And let's all knock on wood that it doesn't snow between now and special town meeting.
Right.
And we have, and by the way, I forgot to tell you this with my little visit the other day. We have a ton of salt.
We do. Yes. We have a lot left over, which is good.
Right.
The building's pretty tough, but we got a lot of salt.
Right.
Yep.
Which
means if we don't, sorry, go ahead, Sue.
I was going to say, maybe we won't have to buy any next year.
Yeah.
Right. I was going to say we won't have to buy as much next year. Thanks to that. So. Already reducing costs for next year.
Exactly. Good management.
And that money that you're putting in, sorry.
No, go ahead, Sue. I'm sorry.
So that money that you would be putting into stabilization right now on that warrant would put us at $3.2 million in a stabilization fund.
What was that number again, Sue? Sorry.
3.2.
Which I suspect is probably the highest stabilization
Since
town's
I've
ever had.
been here.
Yeah. You've been here since 19.
When I first started on the finance committee, we were still using money for budgeting purposes, recovering from the 2008 crash and not putting money into stabilization. So it's very, very glad to hear that we're robust there right now.
Well, let's hope a year from now, Mr. Chairman, you're saying the same thing.
Yes, indeed. So any other questions on the items on the articles on the special town meeting warrant? For those not familiar, budget transfers does not have any details there because we don't know what the budget transfers will be. That is end of the year moving around money within the budget, within departments for specific line items that either went over or under to make everything work. All right, without any further questions, let's head over to the annual town meeting warrant.
And I just want to point out, Matt, just to point to the summary sheet is a helpful way to track these down with.
Yep, I'll flip over to that.
Yeah.
And actually, that I did myself have one question. Cut both on the special and the annual. We mentioned annual town meeting 2019 Article 3, which I believe was the senior center roof. Is that correct?
Correct.
What can I get a more robust explanation of what we're doing in between?
You got it, Rick?
You know what? Go ahead, Sue. You can deliver good news better than I can. Go ahead. Yeah.
So we put a warrant article on the capital plan for $100,000 to replace the roof. After that, we also got a grant from the state, a replacement grant. So we just have to show the state that we paid for the roof replacement. They're going to pay us back for what the roof costs. So that article is actually now available for use.
Excellent.
And at this point, we have a parking lot at the senior center, and the doors are not properly closing, you know, letting air in and whatnot. So Suzanne has requested to repave the parking lot and replace the doors with a portion of that money. But we also have money from program income. And if you want me to explain that to you, I will in depth.
I would like to hear that. Can I do it briefly?
I'm okay not hearing that.
Okay, that's just a derivative of the old, housing rehabilitation program that we had for the last few years in conjunction with Whitman. There's a remaining funds that have to be used for appropriate, uses, for lack of a better term. And senior center would be one of those uses because it serves a population that the grant otherwise would have served. Is that concise enough, Sue?
If you want to make it that brief, yes.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I would point out, Matt, is that, when we got that earmark from the state for the roof, we had put an amount on the warrant of $100,000. We received the earmark from the state. What was that? I think that was 85,000.
80,000.
And the procurement has resulted in a cost of 72,000, I believe. So we've done better than we had hoped in terms of the cost of replacing the roof.
Excellent. So
Can
essentially,
oh,
go ahead.
And just with regard to the parking lot, is how much of that would be, from the grant money versus the town taxpayers? And the reason I ask is because we're sort of being asked to be, fiscally conservative given what's going on, and it doesn't seem like paving the parking lot it's more of a nice to have than a need to have. So I'm trying to understand why we would do that when we're trying to conserve money.
So the grant money that we got is strictly for the roof. So the article that we did last year was for 100,000. And if you actually go to the parking lot, and once we open the senior center back up, it's actually not safe for our seniors to be walking in and out of the, in and out from the senior center to their vehicles, because there are a lot of divots and raising from a couple years ago when we had snow eaves that raised the pavement. So it is a safety issue to do the parking lot.
Okay, so it's a liability basically the way it is now.
I don't know, Justin, have you been down there? I know it's
not recently, no.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
I don't recall the parking lot at all. So
yeah, I would say it has deteriorated quite a bit in just the last 2 years. So,
okay.
The good thing is that again is one-time money. It's not recurring funds, so it wouldn't really be appropriate to use it for a budget anyway. So it's a good opportunity to reappropriate funds from one purpose to another. That really a useful purpose. I know last year we did have some advocates from the Council on Aging raise that issue, even though it hadn't been submitted as a capital article, which that procedurally that's the way it's supposed to work. This is one of those opportunities that we'd love to be able to take advantage of.
So essentially what we're doing from the $100,000 from the article last year is we're taking 48,000 of that and putting it into stabilization during the special town meeting. 52,000 of it towards the doors and parking lot, with that amount supplemented from the program income that you were talking about.
Exactly.
It's kind of a flip. It's 52 from that and 48 from program income. and then 48 to stabilization.
And do we expect that the paving of the parking lot and the replacement of the doors will actually cost $100,000? That seems pricey.
We did get an estimate from Suzanne that was backdated a couple years, and I'm waiting for one of our local vendors to confirm that. So that's not a definite number, but it is what we're thinking.
But you're absolutely right. Those hopefully those are higher than you see on the warrant at the moment. But until we have some estimates, you will not be asked to recommend anything until we have some estimates. Fear not.
And that would be something that we would go out to bid for and not use the highway department for?
Correct.
Yes, that would be correct. That's a fairly substantial job.
Would it be a matter
That being said,
of time for the highway department or expertise? Because I would assume they're pretty good at paving things.
We will ask that. Well, a lot of their paving is contracted out because they don't have, as you know, they don't have a big crew there. But we'll ask that question though.
Yep, and that's why my guess was time. So.
And I think everybody's going to hate me for asking this question, but there was a warrant for $100,000. The state stepped in, funded the warrant completely. Correct?
Well, they didn't fund the warrant. They funded
the project.
The project. So the project. So now we're saying since that happened, we want to do more.
No, what we're saying is we're taking almost half of that money and putting it into stabilization.
Yes.
And we're
so basically 50-50 goes into this, goes into that. All right.
Essentially, right.
Yeah.
The other comes from senior center. Yep.
And isn't this a building?
So we're taking the other half to supplement senior center funding to do more improvements around the senior center.
And isn't this the building that everybody keeps saying is like not doing good?
I think
every time I'm there, there's plenty of people using the property. There's plenty.
No, I think he means the physical building.
Yeah, like it's like falling apart or whatever. Like,
so I think Greg, part of what you're thinking of was they talked about like they've been in previous years talking about leaks in the roof.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Right.
And the new roof is now in place, so that we could hope that fixes that. The doors
under construction in the process.
The doors are definitely an issue, so that's why the doors are being addressed. So
it's my understanding too that the senior center was supposed to be self-sustaining, so they were supposed to, when the town agreed to buy the senior center in, I don't know when, the late 90s, that they were supposed to generate revenue to support themselves. Given the climate of the economy, are we going to have that expectation on them, seeing as though it doesn't seem as though they're doing that right now?
Well, the problem, I'm not generating money means
like renting it out and like.
Yeah, the problem is there's no staff.
There's
no staff to monitor that. And the
is there a reason why we let up on the fact that they didn't no longer have the expectation to be self-sustaining?
Yeah, that predates me, Katie, those conversations, so I can't speak to that.
Couldn't it be in a contract or something though? I think, is the next town manager going to say that predates me too, and there's no one's going to be held to expectations when the economy is crumbling and we're expected to fund all of these things for every department in town?
They do rent the facilities out on the weekends and at nights to different groups, and that does help a lot with their upkeep because we haven't had to put any building maintenance into that building with the exception of the major roof and the what she's asking for this year. They had a problem with I'm not exactly sure what it was, but something with electricity and water getting into the building, and that fund that they put those rental revenues into paid for that completely. Different things. If she needs to replace a refrigerator or a stove, or so she has been able to use those funds from renting out the facility to cover a lot of her cost over the last 10 years that I've been here.
But those aren't, Katie, those are never going to cover the major capital construction requirements.
Exactly.
That's not going to happen.
Capital is one thing, and that's understandable, but all the other costs that should be covered.
It is covering a lot of the cost.
Do they have like a P&L on that?
I can provide one.
I'm not even saying you need to show it to me. I'm just asking the question, do we have like a...
I can provide it for you for the last 3 years. Unfortunately, our server for our old software system crashed, and Wayne is working on trying to get it back up. So I can provide you 3 years of documentation, but not anything past that.
My only thing with this one would be if the state stepped in and gave us $100 grand and we were going to do the roof, we did the roof, or the roof's getting done, then to sort of move on at this point, only because that's another 50 grand that you can put into stabilization and or whatever the income fund, whatever it ends up being, and then we could actually end up looking after. I'm assuming. Again, I know that we need to have a special meeting for this stuff, but or do exactly what you're saying, but know that at a specific date it's either going to be yes or no, and everybody has to be okay with that.
Sure, and again, this gives you an opportunity if you don't recommend this, the town doesn't want to vote this. This is a way to achieve those goals if you think it's the right time. Don't.
Yeah, no, I get it. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Any further questions there?
It's just the other thing is like we don't know what number we need to get to either, right? So.
As far as what, Greg?
Meaning, like, hey, you don't know what it's going to end up being next year.
That's
That's what I mean. So I'm on the side of caution. You know what I mean? And you don't want to sound
Sure.
like not a nice person.
Well, I would again. I mean, those of you who aren't familiar with the facility, you may want to again. I think it's hard to. Make a recommendation on this one way or the other until you go down and visit the facility. I would encourage you to do that. That may influence your overall thought process.
Where is it again? I think I went to my kids thing, one of the kids things.
Summer Street, right?
Yep, Summer Street.
Yeah.
It's near the MBTA station.
Yeah, I love that place. That place was great. I'm being serious.
Right. You know where the dog park is? The dog park shares a parking lot with it.
No, I didn't know that.
Yep.
And pickleball.
Maybe
And keep in mind, that's the other thing to consider is the use of that parking area is multiple times more. Multiple times more. You know what I'm trying to say. It's exponentially more than what it was just recently.
Yeah, it has increased significantly over the last several years.
Because of the dog park? Is that what you're saying?
The dog park
pickleball.
and the pickleball courts.
I think I have the answer to the dog park.
I'm sorry.
How much do we charge in the city to have a dog?
No, Greg.
I mean, that's the answer for that kind of stuff. If the place is getting beat up because there's a bunch of people going there with dogs, charge the people with the dogs the more money.
God,
and not give more free services?
No, I'm only saying that because that's what I just heard.
Oh my God.
I heard it differently.
I think you may have taken that a little to the next step. I think what the point was is that you now have a dog park and you have pickleball courts that are creating more traffic and more parking needs. It wasn't a comment that those are the cause of the deterioration of the parking lot.
Yeah, no, but I get it. Like if you add something else, you can have more traffic, more everything.
Sure.
I love dogs. I literally had a dog for 13 years.
We realize this isn't about dogs, Greg. We know. We won't hold you to that.
No, but I just think
Greg is losing the dog vote right now.
Yeah.
You have my vote, Greg.
thanks.
There you go.
So people put the dog in a car to bring the dog to a dog park at the senior center so they can run around. I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
I would encourage
Yes.
you to visit the location, although as of the moment, those locations are not open to the public.
Correct.
But if you were to take a ride down there, you would at least be able to get a sense of it. And I will say that the utilization of both the dog park and the pickleball courts is extensive. And I'm the first to say, beyond what I thought it was going to be. That's not a knock on the proponents, because apparently the proponents knew exactly what they were doing in trying to fill a need here.
I'm trying to find out what pickleball is.
All right, moving along. Moving along to the annual town meeting warrant articles. Item 1 is the budget. Second item is special education, which we talked about. Moving the fund for a potential mid-year transfer for special education out of the school's budget and into a warrant article, so that if it does not need to be used, it comes back out and goes back to the general fund. Article 3, capital expenditures. I'll flip back over to the warrant. 2 cruisers from the police department, which we talked about. The deputy fire chief's car, which we talked about last week with the fire chief. Trash and recycle.
Again, Matt, can we go over these? The only reason I'm saying can we go over them, because I think these are some of those things that could just get pushed up to the next year. Understandable that all these things are going to be tough and nobody's going to be happy about it. I get it. But can you just go up a little bit?
Yep.
I mean, so if we take 100 grand from, or 50 grand from the other thing, that's 50 grand for the pickle or whatever it is, the dog thing. Then, there's 100 grand, so that's 150 grand. You get another 45, so now there's 200 grand. I mean, again, who's driving this pickup truck for that we just gave them? The fire pickup truck.
Well, it's not the deputy chief.
Let's make that the deputy chief's. No?
It's
Well, let's do it. Like, those are the things that you have to be creative in these situations.
well, the fire chief makes that decision. What's an appropriate emergency response vehicle for the deputy chief?
I mean, the pickup truck's gorgeous. I saw it the other day. I have no idea why that wouldn't be. That thing is an absolute superstar. That thing looks unreal. Has anyone seen this thing? It's awesome.
Yes.
So that's the only reason that I'm saying it. I'm assuming it's got 4-wheel drive. The thing's got a huge bed on it.
Well, I would suggest that the fire chief would be the right person to explain how the apparatus is utilized, and rather than, I mean, I can't tell you why that vehicle is appropriate or inappropriate. I think it's a question for the fire chief. Again, keeping in mind these are all specifically proposed from one-time money. These aren't recurring funds. These are one-time funds that, yes, they could otherwise go into stabilization. We did target trying to get at least $1 million into stabilization for the reasons we've already discussed. Some of these, like for instance, your cruisers, that is, I know the debate over the years has been whether or not that should be in a capital plan or that should be within the budget of the police department, because essentially that's a recurring operating cost, is having some replacement of your vehicles. We have kept it on this plan as a capital plan. That's whether or not one agrees that is essentially those are assets that need to be replaced, on a regular basis. Once again, is the police department going to stop showing up if they can't replace 2 cruisers this year? Sure, that's not going to happen. So
Right.
So I think the question on the police cruisers is, would the police department be able to continue cruiser operation for a full fiscal year without any new cruisers?
And I'm sure that they would, like I said, the vehicles are going to continue to show up. I think some of you may know there's a replacement plan. It's a 322.
Yep.
Go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry.
I was going to say 223.
Okay, well.
322 is the same.
I beg to differ, right? So, and I guess the point of this is not to get to have so many cruisers at
All
a
at the
given
same
time
time.
that need to be replaced. A reasonable turnover program is the
Yeah.
goal.
I understand.
Again, whether it's a year where it's, again, one cruiser as opposed to two, and it takes us off the schedule. But again, that's a priority decision. This is how we propose to fund those things. And as you can see, those are basically public safety issues or items.
Rick,
For what it's worth. I mean, for what it's
what
worth.
year are we in with the 322, 223, 232?
It's reoccurring.
No, I know, but I'm saying like this is part of.
I believe this is the second of a two. I think.
Right, it'll be 223.
I believe.
So this is one of my
I think
questions.
next year would be three, I believe.
Could we do one and then next year four, knowing or at least hoping that this, at least if we could cut this, that next year they'll get the one they were supposed to get and be on schedule if things go back to normal, or at least get close.
Everything's on the table, Greg. The police chief isn't going to be in here putting up a big fuss. There's no question about my point is that these are options. No question about it.
No, and that's my only point, is to try to get to a thing where we say, hey, you know what? We know that we can take out another $500,000 out of here, and everybody will be okay, not super happy, but just okay, or whatever, any number. You can pick whatever number, Rick. Anybody can pick a number. I'm just saying, I'm trying to be picky at this point to say, well, if needed, could we do these 10 things, and then everything else can be a little easier?
So, Chris, are you going to talk? Okay. So,
I'm just
do
gonna
you want
say,
to?
can this be like the open positions? So that,
Well, it could be. I think it's.
I think
I
where
think
this
that
is,
it's best
this is-
not to appropriate the funds, even if it's the scenario that Greg brought up, for instance, if there was one cruiser that was purchased, and maybe at the end of the fiscal year, if there was free cash that wasn't expended and there's a big sigh of relief at that time, but I don't think it's wise to appropriate that 94,000 and say, don't buy one of the vehicles. Would the chief comply? Absolutely. But I don't think that I don't think that's good form. I think Greg's suggestion would be a little more helpful.
Whatever
Yeah,
you
I was
said
gonna-
makes a lot of sense.
I was going to say where this is capital and coming from free cash, it's a little bit different than money within the normal budget, like within the general budget, where it's the money here is allotted specifically to be used only for this purpose. So we wouldn't be able to then take that money and use it for something else within the same fiscal year.
And, obviously, if the finance committee chooses to have we can actually, when push comes to shove, just add another column to this table if you have recommendations, just for the ease of use at town meetings. So,
Yep.
So want to make it as easy as possible. But again, those are all legitimate questions or options, no question about it. And whether or not you wish to have further conversation with the chiefs, obviously that's your prerogative, and you may wish to do that. Especially if town meeting gets pushed off even further, you'll certainly have plenty of time.
That's a good point.
Take a note of that.
But you would suggest,
So-
the suggestion would be potentially to put, for instance, as the cost of one cruiser into stabilization, just to continue to build that over and above. Is
Yeah,
that, Greg, what you're?
That's what I was thinking. Like or even asking the chief, like, what would make more sense to you, having getting one cruiser now and then maybe getting the other one later, or obviously if you went to him and said no cruisers, obviously who's going to say no cruisers? But
Yeah.
The point is, if we can maybe even save 50% on a lot of these line items
Sure.
right now, just as in making a budget, and then if things are okay, look, Nobody has an issue with everybody getting what they need in cars, and it's not like the cruisers aren't.
I would agree that the chief, the police chief will very happily comply with whatever the requirements of the town are this year. I mean, both the police and fire chiefs, I think you all know, are couldn't be more supportive of what has to happen across the board. So I don't think it's a matter of it's not a matter of breaking the news. It's a matter of what is the best situation. Is putting off a cost that we know we're going to have because we're concerned about the immediate future. It's a balance. I'm sure whatever the finance committee chooses to recommend in these instances, I'm sure everybody would be very understanding of.
And I agree, and I thank you for saying that. But I also, so not that the police chief or the fire chief thinks it's just directed at them. I think these things need to happen across the board to say this is what we're doing as a town right this minute to make sure that if things don't work out great, that we're not in a bad position.
So, and just so you know, Greg, Rick and Sue already did go through the capital plan and chopped a lot of stuff that would have otherwise been on it that we are not seeing already.
Yep.
And they tried to restrict it to public safety type of articles, type of items. So what we would have normally seen at this point in the process would have been a lot more things listed in the free cash thing, like we saw previously with the curbs and pavement of the library and town hall parking lot, and things of that nature would be listed in here along with the cruisers and the deputy fire chief's car. And
I gotcha.
Right. I mean, for
instance, as you go down, you're not going to find a lot of other areas where there's even the potential to cut, like the trash and recycling carts. That's every year buying more carts to replace kind of a thing. The MS4 permitting, which I'm highlighting right now, that's not something we can't pay. That's a safety permit thing.
And Matt, just to that specific point, initially, while the police department had requested themselves a new pickup truck and 2 motorcycles, the fire department had also, the board of DPW had requesting a front end loader and a line painting machine and a pickup truck. All those have come off.
Yeah.
Those have all come off. Those are things that they're just, and we've talked to all of them. This isn't, nobody's going to be upset. They all get it. So there were a number of things that were indeed being requested and proposed that it just wasn't the right time.
Yeah, no, that and that helps to know that.
But that doesn't mean that if the finance committee, if your recommendation was, some of the options we've discussed, that there's not going to be any pushback. That's not going to be the question. It's a matter of what, do you put things off at a higher cost tomorrow? And that's a collective decision.
Yep, and we can dig into that further. So the areas where I would have additional questions, like Greg's, the fire alarms at town hall and library, are those not working?
The panel upgrade at town hall, the fire alarms, the panels have to be updated because the control systems, they're outdated and they can't be serviced anymore. It's really that simple. They're tied together with string, obviously an exaggeration, but that's the problem. They're 22 years old and simply can't be serviced anymore. Is that? Have anything to add on that, Sue? From
what was that, Katie?
What did we just upgrade?
The
security system and the alarm panels.
Alarms and doors.
Not fire alarms, but door.
And it's not all one system?
No.
The fire, it's actually a fire suppression system.
Right, that's the fire panel is the fire, yes, the fire
Right.
suppression system, that's what it runs, yes.
So then my other question was, is painting the Frollo a requirement in these economic times?
Peter
What
has
exactly
told
are we
us.
doing with painting?
Peter has told us that certainly could wait. You know, if that's what's going on, then they're certainly willing to, do the same. I don't know if you're familiar with, we up a little bit, town MS4 permitting. That's been discussed a little in the past.
Yep.
I do have from our engineer a fairly in-depth explanation of what all that is. I had asked for that specifically so that I could provide it to the Finance Committee and others who might be interested. It's a little bit beyond my ability to to, I think, effectively communicate to you all that that goes into it. So I will get that to you the next couple of days, actually.
Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but the short answer to it is it's stormwater.
Exactly.
And how we deal with that.
It's a federal permitting program that
Yep.
we must comply with.
Yep. So moving down, we get into the water department where the money is coming from the water reserve fund. Which we went over with them. Sewer department, and then golf department. Each of those are coming from the funds within their own departments, which are the fees are paying for.
You will notice there is an article for under the sewer department.
I was going to get to that. It's Article
Then I will
4.
wait for you to do so, Mr. Chairman.
It is Article 4, so it's next. Do we have any questions on the water, sewer, or golf funds in Article 3?
I think the sewer person, when he was in, said that they actually were, they were covering practically their whole budget with the charges. And the water, I assume, is similar. The golf, I don't think was quite as clear as that, but just because of the way it works, and that's another where the revenue is going to be down considerably, I would think, this year.
So golf was definitely, when we discussed with them, their income was definitely greater than their expenses, much more than the $15,000. And they had, I'm not sure if you were not there for that meeting specifically.
I wasn't there, but I saw they sent me their revenues and their expenses, and I didn't see it as obvious. But
yeah, we definitely, we went over it while we were in there, and there was some, because of the timing of the transition to being a town department, there was some confusion on the sheets, but there was definitely, I think it was somewhere in the vicinity. The expenses were somewhere in the 200,000s, and the income was somewhere around 400,000.
Yeah, they in some of those initial costs for rental of the carts.
Yep.
Once those are behind them, they'll be doing reasonably well. But I think. Go ahead, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate the circumstances right now, because when we met with them, they had record December, January, February income. They were having excellent attendance and income so far.
Mm-hmm. And they do. Go ahead, Sue. I'm sorry.
So that 15,000 is not coming from their revenues. That's coming from their surplus from 2019 that was certified by the Department of Revenue, just as our free cash. They call it retained earnings for enterprise.
Oh, okay. All right.
And their retained earnings was $410,000, so they're only looking to spend 15,000 out of that.
I find it funny that we couldn't get anyone to bid on running a golf course if it makes that much money.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it is the fact that it takes a significant capital investment So the length of contract was very important. And to what extent the committee that oversees that was comfortable with a long-term contract. I think that's part of it. But again, I would have to say that I think if those of you who remember the conversation, it's fairly a lot of factors involved.
Yeah.
As long as you guys have looked at it and they're making money, that's all I'm asking.
Rick, do you know if this whole thing affects them, or are people still able to golf there?
Well, it definitely affects them. There are the factors involved. They're not paying as much, in labor. Being open, they're paying some. There are some employees that are in the same non-essential status, but there's also there is business going on. Some restrictions, singles only, no carts. So it's clearly not what it could be, but there's some minimal business going on. And as was mentioned earlier by Matt, they did very well earlier in the season. So although it impacts them, it shouldn't, at this point, there's no reason to believe that it's going to put them in a deficit, the enterprise fund in a deficit. But it's too early to tell, but I don't know if Sue, I don't know if you have any further information on that, Sue, but at this point, again, they've done well. They're still open. Some of their expenses, they don't have to, there's a lot of money they don't have to expend in terms of upkeep of the course. So there isn't a great answer, Greg, but those are some of the factors involved.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not really great golf season right now, so I mean, all this shouldn't hurt them that much. But then again, people have a lot of time on their hands right now.
Yeah.
So maybe they could put like a singles night thing out on the as a thing for a little marketing thing when everybody drives by.
No, it's not singles.
I know, I'm kidding.
It's not like where you meet people to play golf, Greg.
But that's what I'm saying. That would draw people in, just for the record.
That would be, you may have just come up with a marketing opportunity.
Yes, that's what I mean.
COVID-19 marketing opportunity.
That's right.
You probably don't want to put that on there.
No.
All right. Any other questions? Water, sewer, golf. All right. Now, this was my big question when I saw the documents that Sue gave in. Article 4, $6.775 million in water main replacement. I went back through my notes from when the water department was in, and there was no mention of this whatsoever.
Exactly. Let me, two comments I have. Number one, you will need to have another conversation with the sewer superintendent, okay? This is a result of the sewer main break. Not that long ago, was it about 2 months ago? And that caused a couple $100,000 worth of expense. Some of you must remember that. The sewer system was, areas were well, nobody lost
Yes, we did.
service.
We did discuss that with John when he was on.
So the engineer, apparently their engineering company has recommended that main has to be replaced, ought to be replaced as soon as possible. Now again,
So that is a sewer main, not a water main for Article 4, because it only says
that is correct.
16-inch force main. It doesn't specify.
I'm sorry, yes.
I had assumed it was a water main.
Sewer main, no, yes.
Come on, Matt. How do you not know that?
Yeah, but keeping in mind, this is one of those items that came into us fairly recently. We know the reason. John Stone has some engineering information on this, but you would probably want to have a follow-up conversation with him about this.
Okay.
And he expects that, by the way.
And I went down there and he explained to me that stuff, like the thing inside that filled up with poop. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, but I tell you, they did a great job keeping, not losing any service.
I don't know how they did it with that stuff going through there.
But it was expensive. It was expensive.
So, Greg, do you want to
Fortunately, there's
check?
no insurance recovery because it wasn't an accident. It was normal wear and tear. So that, unfortunately, we can't recover insurance funds on that.
Greg, do you want to check in with John during the week and see if he can come on next week to discuss that?
Yeah. Yes. Next, that would be next Wednesday. Yeah, right? That was-
Yep. All right. Camera for the school, siding for the police, we've talked about a lot. The fire apparatus, we talked about a lot last week. And Central Street Bridge rehab, we talked about, but I'd say Articles 5 and 8, we should probably talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah, Article 8 is, correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, is that going to remain on here? I don't know that. Looking at my notes here. No, I'm sorry.
That's ready to go. It was the dam that wasn't ready to go.
I'm looking at, all right, I'm sorry, okay. Different versions of the warrant here, okay.
So,
Article 5.
yep, Article 5, camera for school.
So it's actually for the Woodstrill and Furleo to put cameras and access panels in the school for safety of the students.
They're upgrading their systems, yeah. Again, keeping in line with safety concerns.
And sorry, that was Woodsdale and
Furleo.
Furley, I want to say it's Beaverbrook.
I was going to say there's no students at
Yeah,
Foley.
Furleo is
That's an excellent point. Yes, my bad.
So I have
Excellent point.
So it's Woodsdale and Beaverbrook, and the cost is a lot higher than what we had at Town Hall, only because they don't have the wiring in place, and the Town Hall had the wiring in place.
Okay. Central Street Bridge.
And just going back on the summary sheet, I had the wrong school, Furleo, so please, that actually is Beaverbrook, correct, Sue?
Correct.
Okay. And as opposed to the painting, this obviously is something that's unquestionably a safety concern. Once again, Peter Schaefer, if these things can't happen right now, then they can't happen right now. But as you can see from the summary, the goal was to bundle some of these matters, the security system, police siding,
yep,
fire apparatus, and bridge rehab into a bond issue rather than paying out of one-time funds. Number one, they're all eligible and appropriate for a multiple year borrowing. And talking to Sonia, there'd probably be a 5-year ban, and none of these would be permanently bonded. But you wouldn't want to use, for the most part, take this kind of money out of free cash in a year like this. So looking at what we consider to be public safety or other requirements, to borrow those for the short term.
So the Central Street Bridge, is that the railroad bridge? Where, I'm just trying to figure out where on Central Street we're talking about.
When we discussed that before, that's the one that is across from the Butterfly Garden and the temple and the historical building there before you get to the police department and highway department and St. Bridget's. Right where the water is.
Okay.
There's a little bridge.
Yeah, it's pretty small, right? Yeah. Does it need to be replaced, or are we just repairing it for that price?
Well, it's a rehabilitation. However, obviously, I'm not a structural engineer. But how much of that really becomes replacing the existing structure. I don't know exactly. I'd have to get you some further information on that. And I can't
Right.
remember,
Sure.
Matt, what, I can't remember exactly the conversation that we had with John when he was in, so.
I don't remember the exact details. I don't remember how urgent it was. I know that they have cones up there,
Yes.
Didn't the,
but
didn't
I
the
don't
state,
remember. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
didn't the state declare it an issue or something?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
they did.
Yeah.
In 2016, right?
And now I was gonna say, and
Possibly.
this needs to be accomplished at some point. No question about it, and the sooner the better, because you're right, Chris. It's not the first time that cities and towns are a little slow in responding to state commandments, but this is a legitimate, concern, and we don't need orange cones up there for the next 5 years either.
Okay,
What's the
so
camera thing, Matt? What was the camera thing that was above this right here? Like above this screen?
that was what we just discussed, the camera security for
Yeah,
Woodsdale.
no, I mean like above, or maybe that's the one that I was talking about. Can you go up one page or go back one page that you were looking at?
Yep. Hang on one second.
Thought there was something about a camera on that too.
Yes.
Maybe I'm
Same
wrong.
thing. Right there.
It's the same thing. Got it. All right. I just wanted to make
Same
sure
thing.
it's the same thing. Got it.
Just a different view of it.
Yep.
So
And the cameras for the school, the new school?
nope, those are cameras for Woodsdale and Beaverbrook.
Right. Cameras, really security systems. Security
Yep.
systems is a.
Any other questions for those, including the police station siding and the fire engine repairs? Okay. Article 9, the public fees or records to provide supplies for such requests.
This was something that between the town clerk's office and Sue, they conjured up this. This is something some other towns utilize. When we have public records requests, there are times when those can get somewhat excessive in terms of their cost to produce. Cities and towns are eligible to charge for public records requests. So this is simply a matter of ensuring that public records requests can be accommodated through the town without having any significant, impact on any one operating budget. And again, this is with a revolving fund, this is $5,000 is a limitation on activity. It's not an appropriation. The town does not have to come up with $5,000. That's just the limit of how much money can run through that fund.
Yep.
It may be $100 next year. It could be 4,000. We don't know.
And you're saying we can't charge people for this stuff right now?
No, we can't. And the funds the money that is charged to people to obtain public records would go into this fund, and that can, in order to fund the expenses of producing those. It's producing a piece of paper for 25 cents is different than having somebody on a staff have to go through a significant amount of documents and put in hours of time to comply with a public records request. That's really what it's intended to do.
Yeah, I think that sounds like
It's a good idea.
Yep.
Yeah. So this was something that in response to concerns of the town clerk's office that Sue did a little homework and came up with this vehicle to accomplish that.
It's awesome.
Okay.
All right. Article 10,
Yes.
$9,000 wage classification study.
Right. You would not have seen this before. Approximately 5 years ago, maybe 6, the town actually appropriated funds. I have requested funds for a wage and classification study. Our department heads are not on any pay plan. Town approved that, and for various reasons, some of them having to do with, well, all of them having to do with labor issues, that I did not pursue that. I have since done that. We do have a plan that has been proposed to us from the Collins Center. I'm not sure if any of you know, the Collins Center is the Public Policy Institute at UMass Boston, and they perform this project. They've done other projects in the past, and we now have a wage and classification plan in order to implement that. Now, that is for most department heads as well as some secondary or some non-department heads, but your assistant town accountant, assistant town clerk, assistant treasurer collector, those positions are now on a plan, a pay plan, and that they weren't on a pay plan. It's very haphazard how we paid these people. So $9,000 is to put people onto the appropriate steps as has been recommended. So that would be essentially the pay raises for several of our department heads and other staff people. And I will forward you a copy of that.
So again, this is going to be one of those things that I'm sure everybody's going to not be cool with. I mean,
I don't disagree, Greg.
Anybody have to be getting raises in this particular?
Yeah, I would be happy even if it was a matter of just getting people on the plan, period, and for future growth.
These are non-union people?
Some of them are non-union, and some of them are union because we have this strange managers union that was established a year or two before my time here. It's our financial officers are not in the union. Some of our department heads are in a union.
Wouldn't that be the union job though, for the people that are in the union?
Well, this is the problem right now. It's simply a matter of it's just indiscriminate because you have people in the union who don't necessarily belong in the same pay classification. So yes, it could be something that we simply apply to the union, but we have a lot of non-union positions that need to be, in my opinion, and when the town appropriated the funds years ago, that people should be on a pay plan. We shouldn't just be indiscriminately saying, well, this position deserves this, let's give it this. And so that's the intent. Now, how we implement that, Greg, whether this is a good year to do that in its entirety, absolutely valid question. And so this is, be aware of it, and we'll probably have further information or recommendation on this.
Yeah.
My goal would be to get people onto a pay plan. I will confess, going back on time a little bit, it was my goal to update our non-union personnel code, as well as provide a wage and classification plan that would make people who are in this managers union wonder why they need a union. Ideally, we don't have managers in a labor union, although it's not unheard of for municipalities. I don't think it's necessary here, but that's not for me to say. So the goal was to have a good comprehensive personnel plan so that people would agree, why am I paying union dues when we have a really good plan? So going back a period of time, that was part of my motivation. But for various reasons, this piece of it has been delayed. We do now have the plan is basically one of comparable salaries for comparable positions in comparable communities, which, I'm sure what one would expect. It also updated all our position descriptions. So it's been a good process.
Good.
How this gets implemented, as I mentioned, I would be happy just to get people on a pay scale and a grade, even if it doesn't increase their income this year. So implementation is different, is a different issue. Right now, the funding I have on here as a request. That's how much it would be to get this going. I'd like to do it, but I'm as cognizant as anybody, Greg, that this may not be the right time to do it to this extent.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
All right. I think most of the rest of the stuff we should be able to go through pretty quickly. Article 11 is transportation for the VOTEC, which is an every year article. It's, I believe, the same amount every year, the 14,000. Any questions? Article 12 is the Community Preservation Committee, which we went over last week. Article 13 is purchasing equipment to be used to maintain Griffin's Dairy.
Yes. I'm sorry. This was obviously a request from the some of the leadership of that committee. In fact, and I know they had also spoken to some members of the Board of Selectmen. This is basically some, lawnmowers and some other, a small chipper, things that they've had historically. They're falling apart, and the DPW simply can't maintain them anymore. And these are all used by volunteers.
Okay. Any questions there, Greg?
Yeah, sorry, Rick, just one more time. I'm trying to read it at the same time you were talking. I
Sure.
should have listened more.
Well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, I know you know Griffin's Dairy, but.
It's where I get all my milk.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. What year is this?
Yeah.
Basically,
1920.
the property is, the custodians of that are a volunteer committee. We call them, hard to believe, the Griffin's Dairy Committee.
Wow.
And they have, they basically maintain the property. We do have a contractor that mows and grows some product down there. They also take care of clearing all the paths, trails, parking lots, the community garden. And the equipment they've been using has been basically hand-me-downs from the DPW over the years, and it just can't be maintained anymore. So we have a small group of volunteers who do a tremendous amount of work to keep that property as much of an asset as possible to the public, and they do a great job. So this is just a matter of getting people the tools that they need to continue to do what they've been doing as volunteers for many, many years.
Do we know what they need?
They need mowers, basically a mower,
Like riding mower?
And a chipper. And there's also some small stuff like, leaf blowers, and quite frankly, those are things that realistically, hey, let's just buy them a leaf blower. But they submitted the article, and it's, this is.
Well, the reason I was saying it is it's the same thing I said. You'll hear me say about a bunch of stuff. Maybe we can figure out a little bit more of a creative way to not say no, right? So instead of it being a new mower and a new weed whacker and a new blower, whatever it is, maybe we get some good. And I hear the point of the used stuff is somebody else's problem, but I also buy a lot of used stuff, and I don't know. I definitely don't really buy other people's problems. I'm buying something cheaper than most people are. So it just maybe we be creative in some of these instances where we're looking to do this.
I guess my comment would be that the volunteers on this committee are some of my most favorite people in this town, Greg. So careful. No, sorry, I mean, you know some of these volunteers. How much?
Well, that's why I'm saying I want to get it to them instead of.
How much is it? How much can you really save for equipment, quality equipment that's going to last for years? I don't know equipment, Greg.
I'll give you a good example. 100%. My tractor that I bought is a very good John Deere. You can't buy it at like a box store or anything. It was $10 grand. I bought it for $4,700 with 93 hours on it. So 93 hours, very, very low. They're out there. And yes, maybe the answer is you can't buy stuff off Craigslist or something like that. I don't know. But my point is a lot of it's there. I'm not saying to get a 1990, but a good something that will last and go 1,000 hours and that we can do.
I don't disagree with you, Greg. It's not certainly my expertise, but I wouldn't know what number to put in there. I wouldn't know what the right number is. So if there's a number in there and equipment can be bought more cost effectively, then we can all hope for that. But that's the purpose of it. If there's
if we get a list from them, that would be the easiest thing. I
can get you that. Yes.
Yeah, and I can help, and I think it will get them
absolutely
exactly what they want.
Right.
That would be great.
They're easy to please. They work hard, as hard for the town as any of our volunteers. So
yeah,
I have a warm spot, I confess.
No,
right.
I'm good with it.
All right, Article 14, Health Imperative. We get this article every year. We are always in agreement to support this every year. It's to help pay for a service that Abington residents have available to them who are survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. Article 15. I admit I have not read through this. Is this the, Sue, do you know what this is? This looks like it's the...
This is a petition article by, I'm not sure exactly who, by the leadership of the current ABCAM, Cable Access Corporation. I'm really not sure how this changes the existing. Last year there was a revolving fund.
we had to
fund set up.
switch it to essentially be a pass-through from the town.
Right, and I don't know how this differs. I had confessed I have not looked at this that closely. It's by petition.
Okay.
It's only $5,000. Again, everybody's going to probably hate me for saying this. Go back up. I'm definitely not knocking Article 14. I'm asking.
That's good because we're on Article 15.
We already moved on.
I know, but just so everybody's clear, I'm not knocking Article 14. My question is, in the state of Massachusetts, isn't it required you have insurance? Health insurance. With health insurance comes this. Like something like this, where the reason I know is because my employees have this as a thing for them through health insurance. They have a line that you can call and talk and stuff like that. So that's what I was asking, if that's what this was for.
So this is a organization, a place in Brockton that helps provide the services. It's not to provide services for Abington employees. It's the place that provides services to help fund somebody that provides the service for Abington residents.
Yeah.
It's not medical. It's more, I guess it's more like AA.
Yeah. No. I
so it's not a service that you can get.
Emotional.
But they provide the service, but they need the funding to make sure that the people who want to remain anonymous in their domestic abuse, sexual violence, that they have a place to go.
I did. That's why I was asking for the clarification.
Yep. All right. Articles 16, 17, 18, and 19 are all road acceptance. I don't think the Finance Committee has any particular position on accepting roads. I don't remember seeing town meeting articles to accept roads before. I know it's been like selectmen. But...
Well, the planning board. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a petition that has to actually go to ultimately to the planning board and the board of selectmen, which begins the process, the layout process. The selectmen then receive that petition. They refer it to the planning board to lay out the roadway. Ultimately, that comes back to the board of selectmen with a recommendation by the planning board, and then it can be accepted by town meeting.
Does it cost any money?
No, it doesn't cost us any money. Ultimately, what would cost money is if and when the roadway is accepted. Now the town takes care of it.
Yep.
Plows it, maintains it.
Can we put a thing on there that there has to be single-family homes?
No, these are developments that already exist. So you can't put that. You can't put that.
So Greg, the way this works is when a new development is built and it creates essentially a road in and out of the development. It is not approved by the town until the entire development is complete.
And it can't be private.
It can be private if the town doesn't approve it.
All right. Do we know what road this is? Is it going to be?
There are four on here. There are four on here. It is McHugh Circle, Crabtree Lane, Belcher Street, and Cook Way. And I don't know where any of those are off the top of my head.
Crabtree Lane is over off of Shaw Ave.
And
It's
so
right. It's near where I live.
And so is McHugh Circle.
Okay.
And,
Oh yeah, good point. Yep.
yeah, and the other two are in that new development on Veterans Place, off of
53.
Veterans Place is new
Right
development.
behind Target and Stop and Shop.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Intellectual and developmental disabilities. Final fiscal year 2021. Rick or Sue,
That's another petition article.
Okay.
We have not seen this one before.
Okay.
You know what we know at the moment.
All right.
The South Shore.
We'll have to investigate them between now and next week to talk about it more. We talked about Article 21 already with the senior center, parking lot and doors. We don't need to revisit that more. The rest are bylaws and zoning. Sue, is there anything financial in any of the
No, nothing.
remaining ones? Excellent. Anyone have questions there? We can dig into them.
I had a thought, Rick. You obviously know we pay a decent amount of money to rehab stuff throughout the year and make things somewhat better instead of like building a brand new one. Would it be worth it to hire a person and that's their job to do the door, make sure the doors, I don't know what's wrong with the doors, but make sure the doors work no matter what for this place, and go out there and use one of the tractors that has a grading blade and grade the driveway or whatever. I mean, would it be something that we should do or look into, or is it just, the reason I'm saying is we obviously pay a lot of outside money to outside places. Could we bring any of that money inside to where we could hire some people, keep them on the books, but not saving some money, but also maybe getting a better product because they're working for the town or something? No, they didn't just say no. If the answer is no.
No, well, couple of thoughts. Number one, to have one person with all that different expertise may be hard to find.
Yeah.
And also, when you're talking about hiring a body, again, you've got all the costs that come with that. So it's, I think a facilities director or facilities department, even a joint facilities department with the school department, would be a really nice thing. But you are talking about additional personnel costs and benefit costs. So it's not a bad concept, Greg. It's just a matter of how inexpensively can you get all the right expertise you need to do that.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So that brings us through most of our agenda for tonight. Let me call the agenda back up. The discussion of town manager transition and the financial impact. Just as a quick update, I did reach out after our last meeting to the Board of Selectmen. I let them know about our sense of the meeting vote and our intention and what our preference was. I did ask them about if they had been investigating or if they had intentions of where funding was coming from. and they are going to get back to me on that. They have they replied that they don't have the initial information readily available, and that they are trying to work on that. And I don't know if there are any updates on their negotiations with a potential new town manager. I do know that our current town manager, Rick, is in negotiations with another municipality to become their new town manager. Congratulations to Rick on that. And so
Thank
that
you.
definitely changes the calculus of overlap. And we're going to continue to look at that as those both progress. Sue, do you have any updates from the accounting side of things?
No, I do not. I said more than enough last week.
Anyone else with questions or comments? Any liaison reports? Okay, we don't have correspondence. We don't have minutes to review. So our next meeting will be, one second. Our next meeting will be next Wednesday, April 22nd, once again at 7 o'clock on Zoom. Are there any other items to discuss? Motions?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
A motion to adjourn and a second. Any discussion? Without any, all those in favor of adjourning until next Wednesday? Everyone but Greg. Oh, hey, there's Greg. All those opposed? It is unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time. We will talk to you soon.